Have you ever seen a man ignored by hundreds every day, yet still believe he deserved more? Not out of arrogance, but out of necessity, out of desperation, out of a quiet faith that refuses to die, even when the world tries to bury it. New York doesn't forgive the weak, and Arnold learned that sleeping among the subway rats. On that freezing December night, he carried nothing but a tattered blanket and a soggy newspaper. But inside him, something was growing. An invisible seed, one nobody saw, not even him, and that's exactly why you need to watch this story to the end. Because when a man's soul hits rock bottom, that's when it starts to rise. If this story touches you in any way, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. It costs nothing, but to us, it means everything. Now take a deep breath, because what you're about to hear might change how you see the streets and yourself. It was 2012, the harshest winter in a decade. Arnold was 40, his face weary, his thick beard hiding the shame of begging for coins. He no longer asked for help with words, only with his eyes that had learned to expect nothing. His spot was the corner of 47th and Lexington, where Wall Street executives rushed by, oblivious to the man sitting at the feet of a world he once dared to dream of. A former truck driver, former husband, former citizen. Life had stripped him of every title. All that remained was one, invisible. But that morning, something different happened. While rummaging through a dumpster behind a restaurant, his frozen fingers found a discarded book. Its pages were torn and greasy, but the title was still legible, Think and Grow Rich. He didn't know exactly what it meant, but those words seemed to mock him. Think and grow rich. How, when he couldn't even think through hunger? Still, he kept the book, not out of hope, out of need. He needed something to rest his head on that night. Arnold didn't know it yet, but that book would be the first brick in an invisible ladder, one he'd climb with his eyes closed, with bleeding hands and a weary heart. But before any miracle came the real hell, and he'd have to cross it alone. Do you think you've seen someone lose everything? Wait until you see what the streets did to Arnold. What happens when a man stops believing he deserves to be saved? He starts to fade, first inside, then slowly outside. His face blends into the shadows. His name becomes noise, and his steps drag as if each one is a goodbye. Arnold went from man to shadow, and then to no one. On the sidewalks of New York, he was just another pile of blankets and bones, a body surviving on instinct with no plans, no voice. His days blurred into nights, and the city's sounds, horns, shouts, engines, became the soundtrack to his descent into a personal hell. Hunger wasn't just pain, it was humiliation. Asking for food took more courage than asking for forgiveness. Often, with swollen eyes and a collapsing stomach, Arnold chose to swallow shame rather than face another rejection. He knew how people looked away, how they pretended to check their phones to avoid his misery. Once, while reaching for a forgotten sandwich in a dumpster, he was kicked by a security guard. He didn't react, just fell, lay there on the asphalt. Pain no longer surprised him. It was part of the inner landscape. The cold was the executioner, an invisible enemy that crushed his chest, paralyzed his fingers, and made even his thoughts ache. Arnold lost 2 friends that winter. They slept and never woke up, froze with a final sigh of exhaustion, buried in unmarked graves, no names, no goodbyes. Sometimes he wondered why he still breathed, why his heart kept beating when there was no reason left. But without knowing it, he carried a spark, a distant memory of the daughter he hadn't seen in years, her smile, her last "I love you," before he vanished from her life. It was little, but it was everything. The loneliness. That was the cruelest part. Surrounded by millions, yet so utterly alone. Time seemed frozen, each day a repeat of the same emptiness. No plans, no future. Just the present, barren, grey, sterile. At night, he lay on the hard ground, using the filthy book as a pillow, and closed his eyes, trying to imagine another life. But even dreams began to fail, even hope began to fall silent. And that's when he almost gave up. After 3 days without food, hours under the rain, soaked, shivering, waiting for a death that wouldn't come. It was there in delirium that something shifted, something small, silent, but decisive. And you'll understand what soon. An unexpected help, a sentence, a look. Sometimes that's all it takes to reignite the fire. Life doesn't warn you when it's about to change. It doesn't knock, doesn't announce itself in the skies, doesn't prepare your heart. Sometimes it just changes, silently, in an almost invisible gesture, like a spark no one sees, but one that starts to set fate ablaze. Arnold expected nothing that day. He was leaning against the side of a laundromat, trembling, trying to warm his hands with his own breath. 3 days without food, sunken eyes, his stomach begging for mercy. Then a man passed by, not in a hurry, not with pity, just with attention. He stopped, looked Arnold in the eyes, already more than most did. Then he crouched and left something on the ground. Not money, not food, a bag. Inside, a hot coffee and a note. "You are not what the world made you believe." Those words, just that. But something in him broke in that moment, and at the same time, something rose. He cried, for the first time in ages. A dry, weary cry, but real. And with the taste of that bitter coffee, he felt something he'd forgotten. Dignity. As if someone had reminded him he still existed, that he was still human. He didn't know who the man was or why he did it. But for the first time he thought, maybe I still have a chance. That night, he didn't sleep. He stared at the concrete ceiling of the shelter where he'd found a spot. The note was still in his pocket, read and reread dozens of times. Then, almost like a whisper, he remembered the book, Think and Grow Rich. He picked it up with dirty hands, opened a random page and read, "The starting point of all achievement is desire." It hit him like an arrow. Desire. But what did he desire? Did he even know? The answer came slowly. He wanted a hot shower, a job, a place to live, to see his daughter again, to laugh without fear, to feel pride looking in the mirror. Was it too much? Maybe, but it was real, and that was enough. The next day, he took a risk and sought a permanent shelter. He found a community center offering meals and classes. Yes, classes. Financial literacy, basic computer skills, routine planning. It wasn't Wall Street, but it was a start. And Arnold signed up. That's where he touched a computer keyboard for the first time, learned what an email was, discovered what investment meant. Everything was new, confusing, terrifying, but he didn't stop. He devoured the material like it was bread, slept with heavy eyes but an electric soul. For the first time in years, he felt like he was moving, even if crawling, even if stumbling. He fell. He doubted. He thought about giving up. But something was different now. The note, the book, the memory of his daughter, and above all, the question now pulsing inside him like a mantra: what if I still have a chance? What if the impossible isn't as far as it seems? Freedom doesn't come as a gift. It's clawed out, earned, sweated for, day after day. Arnold understood this early on. No one was going to open doors for him. No one was going to hold his hand. But he was no longer the man crawling through the streets. Now he was someone who dreamed, someone who scribbled goals on a crumpled piece of paper tucked in his pocket. Get an address, learn about finances, land a steady job, invest $1. Small, almost naive goals. But to him, they were escape maps from hell. The community center became his first rebuilding ground. There, he learned more than computers or spreadsheets. He learned to get up at 6 every morning despite the pain, to stand tall even when ignored, to smile even when invisible. He started as a volunteer, cleaning classrooms after lessons. Then he was asked to help with breakfast service. And one morning, he met Margaret, a retired banker teaching personal finance to the homeless. She noticed Arnold's attentive gaze, his hunger, not for food, but for knowledge. "Have you heard of index funds?" she asked casually, spreading butter on bread. Arnold had no clue what that meant, but he replied simply, "Teach me." From that day, Margaret gave him extra lessons, sometimes on a park bench, sometimes amid bags and boxed lunches. She spoke of compound interest, inflation, diversification, and he listened as if hearing a sacred secret. One day, she gave him a gift, a prepaid debit card with $20. Invest this $20 like it's your entire life. Arnold didn't spend it. He opened a digital account at a cafe with Wi-Fi, studied how to invest, and with trembling hands, bought his first fraction of a stock, a small act, a click. But in that moment, he cried, because now he was more than a former homeless man. He was an investor, even if just with pennies. From there, things gained momentum. A teacher at the center recommended him for a janitor job at a commercial building in Brooklyn. It was far, required 2 subway transfers, and paid little, but he took it like it was a CEO position. He scrubbed floors as if cleaning a temple, watched suited professionals pass by, eavesdropped on hallway talks of stocks and dividends, and jotted down unfamiliar words to research at night. It was like living in 2 worlds, the floors he cleaned and the sky he was starting to reach. With his first paycheck, Arnold didn't buy clothes or a phone. He bought books, The Intelligent Investor, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, The Psychology of Money. He read during breaks on the subway, over lunch. Margaret kept guiding him, and he applied everything. He built a budget, split his earnings, saved as much as he could. In 6 months, he had $500 invested. In a year, $1,200. Small to many, but for someone who once had nothing, it was an empire. But the greatest victory wasn't financial. It was a phone call. Years later, his daughter. She'd found his name in a community center article about redemption stories, and she wanted to see him. They reunited on a Central Park bench, him in his janitor's uniform with a simple gift, her with tears in her eyes, holding the same tattered book he'd used as a pillow on the streets. She'd kept it all this time, and just when you think you've won, life reveals something even greater is waiting. It all started with an email. Simple, almost invisible, buried among promotions and newsletters, but it held a key. We'd like to invite you, Arnold, to share your story at our annual community financial education event. A modest invite, just a small auditorium, some chairs, a microphone. But to Arnold, it was the world. He didn't hesitate, took a deep breath, put on his only dress shirt, and stepped onto the stage. There, before strangers, he told his story. No fluff, no self-help cliches. He spoke of the streets, the hunger, the shame, but also of the first stock bought with $20, the first paycheck, the first night in a bed after years on the ground. And without knowing it, he touched something in the audience. At the end, a woman stood up, a journalist. She wanted to write about him. You're proof that investing can be more than money. It can be hope. Days later, Arnold was on the pages of a major finance website. The article went viral. It gained traction. From the streets to the stock market, the former homeless man turned investor. The story spread like wildfire. With it came invitations, podcasts, interviews, talks, until a manager of an independent fund read his story and was moved. He called Arnold for a meeting. You have something many of our analysts lack, real experience. Want to work with us as a social impact consultant? Arnold said yes. He didn't understand everything, but he knew what no one else did. What it's like to have zero in your account and still believe you can invest. Life began to spin on a new axis. Arnold started an online channel to teach vulnerable people about finance. He explained concepts in simple, passionate, honest words. In a year, the channel had over 500,000 subscribers. Brands began supporting his cause. One proposed something bold, a micro-investment line exclusively for former homeless people. Arnold didn't just endorse it, he led it. During this time, he founded his own company, Street to Stocks, a social project connecting homeless individuals with financial mentors, psychologists, and practical training. The goal wasn't charity, it was empowerment, freedom, building. And for the first time, Arnold hired, gave jobs, and saw faces that mirrored his old self reflected in the glow of redemption. The first million didn't come with fireworks. It came with tears. On his banking app, when he saw 6 figures for the first time, he didn't shout, didn't run, just closed his eyes and gave thanks. To Margaret, no longer alive, to the man with the coffee, to his daughter, to himself. Because now he knew it was all real. The pain, the mud, but also the glory. And it tasted like truth. One day, walking through Brooklyn, he saw a man leaning against the same laundromat where he'd slept years before. Arnold stopped, sat beside him, said nothing for a moment, then pulled out a bag, hot coffee, a note, and wrote with the same blue pen, "You are not what the world made you believe." But what Arnold did with his wealth was even more powerful than achieving it. Arnold's name spread across the city, but he never forgot where he came from, never traded the memory of cold asphalt for skyscraper parties, never got lost in the mirrors of vanity. To him, every penny still had weight, every word was still a bridge or an abyss. So he used his new voice to carve paths where there were once walls. And he didn't stop. He founded a mobile school that visited shelters and forgotten New York neighborhoods, teaching kids and adults to handle money like it's their future. He created scholarships for at-risk youth, and quietly he paid for therapy for former homeless people who wanted to start over but carried invisible scars. The worst poverty is of identity, he'd say. When the world convinces you you're worthless, the first thing you stop investing in is yourself. A documentary about his life launched on a major streaming platform. It won awards. But Arnold didn't attend the premiere. He was in a cramped Bronx room, listening to an 11-year-old boy say he wanted to be like him, to invest, to be free. And in that boy's eyes, Arnold understood. His legacy was no longer an idea. It was a cycle, alive, pulsing, transformative. At a global financial inclusion conference, Arnold was honored. Called to the stage before world leaders, he didn't wear an expensive suit. He wore the same shirt from his first talk. And with a steady voice and teary eyes, he said, "If you want to change the world, don't toss coins into the pockets of the fallen. Give them the map, the path, and the faith they can walk it. I'm not a miracle. I'm proof that sometimes all someone needs is to be seen." The audience fell silent for a second, then stood, applauding. Today, at 40, Arnold lives with his daughter and helps raise his 2 grandchildren. He lives in a simple apartment, filled with books, notebooks, and plants, all grown by him, including a tree sapling he planted with his own hands on the lot where he once slept with nowhere to fall. It grew, tall, strong, cold-resistant, like him. Like everyone who crossed his path. If you've made it this far, it's because something in you wants to bloom too. Maybe you're down. Maybe you're fighting. Maybe you've forgotten who you really are. But remember this, in chaos, there's a seed, and it only needs one gesture to start sprouting. You're not alone. You never were. If this story touched you, if something stirred in your chest during these minutes, like this video, subscribe to the channel. Share it with someone who needs hope. Because sometimes all someone needs to change their story is to hear a story like this.